The following program is an original production of WICC PBS Chicago.
The railroads are under pressure to prevent dangerous crashes like this one near Galena earlier this year, but they will miss a deadline to install critical new safety equipment. For the first time on Governor Rauner's watch, Illinois' credit rating has taken a huge hit. So has the governor's popularity. Does that help or hurt the chances of finally getting a budget deal in Springfield? And biking with a purpose. We're slow rolling through Chicago with a group dedicated to building healthier, safer communities. Stay with us for these stories and much more tonight on In the Loop. Good evening. I'm Chris Bury. After a series of deadly derailments, Congress ordered American railroads to install expensive new safety equipment. But Chicago's Metra and other rail lines complained they could not meet the end-of-the-year deadline. And after threatening to shut down, it looks like they will catch a break from Washington. In the Loop's Lauren Cohn has more.
It was supposed to be a simple train ride home. Kathy Cook never imagined what happened next would derail her health and her life.
It was really frightening, and all of a sudden we were flying through the air. We hit the building, came down on the track, and then flipped to the side.
Cook was thrown from her seat when the Metra train she was riding flew off the tracks shortly after leaving downtown Chicago.
When it all stopped, I was on the floor.
Cook ended up in the hospital. She underwent 2 back surgeries, including a spinal fusion, and now lives with an implanted spinal stimulator and chronic pain.
I have a battery underneath the skin.
The National Transportation Safety Board ruled operator error caused the crash. But there was more. The NTSB also said, had positive train control, or PTC, been installed, which would have slowed down the speeding train, Cook, along with 36 other people, would not have been injured. Chicago attorney Tim Cavanaugh, who represented the Cook family in a lawsuit against Metra, is an expert on railroad accident cases.
We know in Los Angeles, their commuter rail lines are on track to get this done by the end of the year. Philadelphia is on track to get it done. Metra apparently is not going to get it done.
PTC is a complex and costly high-tech system that uses a combination of GPS, radios, computers, and antennas to track the speed and location of trains. It alerts an operator of any danger ahead and can override the system should a conductor fail to act.
Jeff, how you doing, sir?
Metra Executive Director and CEO Don Orsino says Metra had planned to shut down its commuter service if Congress failed to pass an extension. Plus, Metra recently announced a 2% fare hike to help pay for the cost.
So there's not a day goes by, Saturday, Sunday, that we're not out someplace working on the further advancement of PTC.
Illinois Congressman Dan Lipinski led the push to extend the deadline by 3 years, as long as the rail companies prove they're making progress.
Some railroads have been better than others on this in terms of making progress, but it's not going to get done. But we have to make sure that we keep the railroad's feet to the fire.
But the urgency to install PTC started long before the federal mandate. The NTSB has been pushing for positive train control installation for decades and reports without it, everybody on a train is one human error away from an accident. The NTSB reports PTC could have prevented numerous deadly derailments, including this 2013 train crash in the Bronx that left 4 people dead, 61 injured. And this 2015 Amtrak collision in Philadelphia, where 8 people died, more than 200 were injured. And 2 years after Kathy Cook's train ride nightmare, at the same location, another Metra train went off the rails. 2 people died, more than 100 were injured. Kathy Cook has waited since 2003 to see an upgrade to the nation's rail safety. She, along with everyone else who rides the trains, will be waiting even longer.
I don't know what it takes for a business to actually think of people as people instead of as just ways to get money. They gave them plenty of time to change it. but they haven't, and more people will die.
For In the Loop, I'm Lauren Cohn.
And this week, key lawmakers in Washington agreed to a tentative deal giving the railroads an extension, but the full Congress must still approve. Now here's a look at more stories trending this week.
We intend to close and sell the State of Illinois building.
Illinois' governor is selling off prime real estate as the state's credit rating sinks, along with his approval rating. What will it take to make a budget deal in Springfield?
We're going to try everything we can to bring a level of security and safety throughout the city of Chicago so that our families and our children have the opportunity to grow up free from violence.
Mayor Emanuel wants to spend $250,000 to buy back guns in Chicago's neighborhoods, but he's under fire for blaming a spike in violence on police backing off because they're concerned about becoming viral video sensations.
The police officers, they're trained for that, so they should not be worried about being on YouTube. If they're following the proper procedure, they should have no worries about YouTube.
The car service Uber wants permission to compete with taxis at Chicago's airports. But are they playing the race card to get their way?
You never know. Will a taxi show up in your neighborhood? Will an empty cab pass you by? That's the reality with taxis.
And joining us tonight, Pat Hughes, co-founder of the Illinois Opportunity Project, public policy consultant Amara Enya, and Stuart Cruz, president of Cruz Asset Management. Hello and welcome, everybody.
Hi, Chris.
So this week, another credit agency, Fitch, lowered the boom, issuing a downgrade to Illinois' bond rating. And this is the first such downgrade on Governor Rauner's watch. And so, Pat, is this an incentive to finally get a budget deal?
I don't think so, Chris. I think that what the governor is doing is correct. The Fitch downgrade is on Mike Madigan and John Cullerton and the policies of the last 12 years under Democrat control. If we had a governor other than Governor Rauner, either Pat Quinn or one of the other Republicans who had run, we would already have a budget, but it would be on the backs of the taxpayers. We'd have a tax increase, and we'd have absolutely no structural reform. What the governor is saying is, look, we need to structurally reform pensions, workers' compensation, prevailing wage, and other items that can get our economy going. And I agree that he should hold firm. The interesting thing is, and people don't talk about this enough, is that Mike Madigan and John Cullerton could pass this budget, and their caucuses did pass the budget, and could override the governor's veto, and he vetoed it.
Hold on one second. I thought it was in the Constitution that the governor must provide a budget to the legislature.
So Mike Madigan and John Cullerton passed this budget already, and the governor vetoed it. And they have the power to override that veto, but they don't want to do that, Chris. What they want is the governor to be complicit in this unconstitutional, underfunded budget that doesn't offer any structural reforms that this state needs.
But Amara, I mean, Madigan has been very clear he's not going to go along with these so-called structural reforms because he fears they're going to weaken the unions. And he said this downgrade should be a wake-up call.
Well, I think it's a wake-up call for the entire state. And what this feels like is a power struggle between Governor Rauner and Mike Madigan, whereas the people of Illinois are suffering. There are child care providers who have not been able to access funding, who are shutting down. There are organizations. These are quality of life issues that they're no longer able to function, while what it appears from the public standpoint is a power struggle between Governor Rauner and Mike Madigan. Both sides have to be willing to compromise at some level. This standoff is only hurting the people of Illinois.
And Stuart, what about that point? I mean, as Amara mentioned, we're starting to see impacts now. United Way is complaining about this. The health departments are complaining about this. When those and people who win the lottery can't even get their money if they win more than $600. So where does the political pressure fall?
Well, I think you see this nationally. It goes on at the higher levels in national government, too. I think what people forget is that we're fighting over where to draw the line. I don't think there's a conservative out there that would say we don't have a social net. I don't think there's a liberal out there that says everything has to be equal. And people are so caught up in their own dogma that they're forgetting that it's just about where to draw the line. And I think the pressure falls absolutely on everybody, the voters, to make sure somebody does cooperate with the other side. Unfortunately, that's not the mindset right now. The mindset is to hold firm and hold everybody hostage.
In the meantime, there's a new poll out, and Governor Rauner's approval rating is taking a hit. This new poll has his approval rating at 32%, and half of those now say they almost half disapprove of the job he's doing. So if his approval ratings are falling, what leverage does he have to get his way?
Well, I think the leverage that he has is he has the opportunity to tell the voters and the people that are paying taxes to support the circumstances that Mike Madigan has put us in, that we have to have structural change in our government, or we're going to have exactly the same circumstances going forward that got us into this mess. Now, that poll is a snapshot in time, and it's not surprising, given that the governor is in a very public battle and that the news media reports constantly that we don't have a budget, and like Mara said, that certain services are not being funded. But those folks and those services shouldn't be blaming the governor. They should be blaming the people that got us in this mess over the last 12 years. And the people that are currently in office that got us in this mess, because Blagojevich and Quinn are gone, are Mike Madigan mainly, and then John Cullerton, his partner in crime. And so, although there's a poll out there that says that the governor's approval rating is dropping, my guess is that Madigan and Cullerton's approval is much worse, and that ultimately the governor is going to win this public relations battle.
I have a strong sense that when the governor came in initially, he did have a strong case to make to shake up Springfield, to really drive a lot of the reforms that definitely needed to happen. Unfortunately, he's going to have to wear the jacket for his low approval ratings. I mean, the people of Illinois now, many of those who did want change, but what does that look like? And so process becomes important. At the point at which it looks like the suffering is even more now with the supposed changes that he wants to bring in, I think he's feeling the heat, and he has to take some responsibility for that.
One of the beauties of having somebody like Rauner in office is that he's not a career politician, and it doesn't really matter to him that his approval rating is 32%. So assuming that he's trying to do the best job he can, he doesn't have to worry about it as many other politicians would have to worry about it. And that's kind of where we are trying to go with those kind of elections, taking a non-career politician and putting him in house.
But even if that's the case, you've got Republicans now, including the comptroller, including the former Governor Edgar, Republicans who are saying to Rauner, look, it's time to get off some of these positions and make a deal.
Well, I think, Chris, that the comptroller, Leslie Munger, walked back that statement a little bit and clarified it. But with respect to Governor Edgar and what is known as the Edgar pension rep from 1994, the pension reform that was not pension reform, Governor Edgar is complicit in this pension deal that they cut all these years ago to push those obligations to today, which is why we're facing the $111 billion budget shortfall that we have that eats up 25% of this unconstitutional underfunded budget. So when Governor Edgar opines on what we should do to resolve this circumstance, I think that we shouldn't listen to him. I think that Stewart's right. The governor is not concerned about his poll numbers, which is frankly refreshing that a politician isn't concerned about that. There are structural reforms that need to take place, and if we don't do this now and the governor doesn't force us to take our medicine collectively, we're never going to get out of this mess.
One of the things that the governor wants to do is sell off some prime real estate, including the Thompson Center downtown, which he says could raise several $1 million in this market. Good idea?
Well, I mean, we have to have changes everywhere. I mean, I think we need to make sure we put together a good deal. Obviously, there was a lot of backlash with the parking deal that was put together for the city of Chicago. So if you have an asset that's valuable and you can get a nice dollar for it, then it might make sense. At the same time, you actually have to take a good hard look at it and just make sure you're not doing something out of desperation.
Very quickly on the Thompson Center.
Architecturally, I've never been a fan of the Thompson Center, so I'm not feeling too bad about it, but I think it's one of the options that the governor is putting on the table. Frankly, I think there are other much more significant things that we can do if we're talking about addressing the budget issue.
In Chicago, we've had another horrific story of gun violence over the last week. A 6-year-old who finds a gun in his house, shoots and kills his 3-year-old brother. Mayor Emanuel wants to sponsor some gun buyback programs that would get these guns off the street, and Police Superintendent McCarthy is on board with that. Let's listen to McCarthy.
I've seen grandmothers come in with assault weapons that they took from underneath their grandson's bed. And that kid was a gangbanger. And there's no doubt in my mind that taking that gun off the street saved a life, at least that day.
And the city's coming up with $250,000 to sponsor these, Pat. Good idea?
Yeah, I don't know if this is going to solve the problem. You know, the mayor has failed, Chris, to do the two number one things that a mayor should do, which is protect his populace and make sure that they are educated, right? CPS is a failure. There's tremendous gun violence in the city, and he's offering up what are very small bromides for what are larger structural problems. And I think this is more politics by the mayor than anything else. The city is incredibly violent. And these sorts of programs, although they may work on the margins, don't do anything to, alter the structural realities that these folks in these neighborhoods terribly face every day. And the mayor is so distant from it and not tied enough to it to know what's happening in the city every day.
But are even small steps important?
Well, we have to be willing to get to the root cause of the issue of violence in the city. We cannot continue to do things that just for the sake of doing them. The effectiveness of a gun buyback has not been proven. Will this reduce the number of shootings? Will this reduce the number of killings in our neighborhoods? It won't. It will not. And so why are we doing this? I think it's using valuable time and resources that we could be diverting to actual proven techniques and strategies that reduce violence at the root.
Meanwhile, Mayor Emanuel is under some heat for a comment he made about police, where he said that police are perhaps not as aggressive as they could be because they are fearful that they're going to wind up on YouTube. Sir, what about that?
I don't think that has any merit. I think the normal everyday police officer is going to go out and do his job. On the margins, though, if you have a bad actor, I'm hoping that the fact that technology is more available and they're more visible, it's going to have some effect. But you kind of can't have it both ways. You can't have cameras everywhere to stop speeding, to have the blue light cameras everywhere, and then just say, well, it doesn't work in this instance. At the end of the day, I think we have to embrace the technology that's coming, and there are ways to use this technology to our advantage. There are places, countries that have figured this out, and we can take a lead from them.
Well, crime has gone up, violent crime in Chicago this year. Is it perhaps because police are not being as forceful as they should be?
I don't think so. And I think that's actually an affront to the police officers who are going out there every day and doing their jobs. The reason crime is up is, again, because we have failed to implement the policies that get to the root causes of crime in our neighborhoods across the city. And to say that police are afraid of doing their jobs, well, if they're doing their jobs correctly, then there should be no concern about what video technology is being utilized to capture whatever it is that they do. So I think that was a mistake on the mayor's part.
But just to be careful here, Pat, this was in the context of Mayor Emanuel urging the Attorney General, Loretta Lynch, to publicly support police officers.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what you have in the wake of Baltimore and Ferguson is sort of this narrative about police officers that they're not doing their job correctly. And like Stuart said, even if it's just the result of a single or a few bad actors. But again, this goes to like the buyback issue and other things. The mayor doesn't really understand how to speak on these issues, how to speak in support of the police, how to speak in a way that allows us to get to the root, like Amara says, of the violence in the city. That's why he wants to do a gun buyback, not recognizing that we have the strongest, most restrictive gun laws in the city of Chicago in the country, and yet we have the most violent gun deaths in the country.
Well, the police are taking thousands of guns off the street, more than New York and LA combined. Those are illegal guns that are taken off the streets.
Yeah, it is, but like Amara said, that's not going to make it. It's tinkering at the margins. It's not going to make any structural difference because you've got to get to the root causes of why there are these problems. No economic opportunity, failing schools. Only 10% of CPS seniors are ready for college.
There are socioeconomic issues, I completely agree, that are at the root of the violence issue. Before someone picks up a gun, whether legal or otherwise, there has to be a mindset to actually use it. And so how are we addressing the mindset, the conditions that create individuals who are willing to shoot other individuals? That's the question that we should be answering, not putting together cosmetic programs to make it look like we're doing something.
Here in the city this week, the car service Uber is running brand new ads. They're trying to pressure the city council to let them pick up fares at both Chicago airports. And if we look at the commercial, it seems as if they're playing the race card a little bit. Let's look at that commercial for a second.
You never know. Will a taxi show up in your neighborhood? Will an empty cab pass you by? That's the reality with taxis. But now you have a choice. With just a touch of a button, Uber will show up anywhere you are. South Side, West Side, anywhere. Except at the airport. But that can change too. Call your alderman.
That seems to be definitely suggesting that there's a racial motivation here. Is that an effective tool for them to use in trying to get this political support in the city council?
I think it could be. I mean, I've definitely had issues, even as a white guy, that can't have a taxi go down an alley or whatnot. But don't forget, the taxi companies can also fight back. If there are true competitive advantages that they have against Uber, like insurance or whatever they want to push out there, Yellow Cab, Flash Cab, they can get together and post their own commercial. I'm all for the competition and explaining the differences between the services.
Amara, what about the racial nature of that?
To be honest, as someone, I live on the west side of Chicago, and I have had issues with calling a taxi to come and pick me up where I live. So that's been a significant issue for me. It's the only reason why I would utilize Uber. However, the landscape in the city of Chicago, as it relates to Uber versus taxis, is not fair. There are certain regulatory conditions that taxi cabs are required to undergo that Uber simply doesn't have those same regulations. And again, they're making the racial case, but at the airport, it doesn't really, you can't really make that argument. So they're saying on the one hand, there are certain places they're not able to go, but then they're arguing why they should have access to the airport. So they're making two different arguments in their commercial.
Now, Pat, the airports do seem to be the final frontier here for Uber, at least in Chicago.
Yeah, and the airport should be open to Uber and other services like it. Look, and Stuart referenced this, open competition between different services is good for the consumer. It forces service to get better. It drives down costs. In the case of Uber, in this case, maybe they will go to places that cabs won't go, and ultimately that serves the public. And we're smart enough as a free people, Chris, to decide which car service we want to take and whether or not that's a good one for us or a bad one for us. So open it up. All this is a regulatory body that wants control and a group of people that want control of the marketplace for themselves. And we can't have that. That's why Uber's been so successful. Just ask yourself, why is it so successful? Why is that name Uber so popular among us? It's because they've done a good job competing and people like their service. The more of that, the better.
But open competition on a fair playing field, I think, is fantastic. But when they're starting off with an advantage, then it's not the same. It's not the same thing.
That's true, but that calls into question, are the regulations needed? Now, if there are insurance protocols that are there and the taxi cabs can say, hey, if you get in an accident, we can make you whole again and Uber can't, then that's a competitive advantage. But if their regulations are basically useless and nothing more than just window dressings or control, then maybe they need to go away.
Certain things like a $500 licensing fee that taxi cab drivers have to pay, the background checks required of Uber drivers versus those required by taxi drivers. Those are the sort of things that are different between the industry. So if you can iron that out a bit, I think it will be true open competition between those two sectors.
Is there still some unfairness? I mean, even the aldermen are saying, look, the taxi drivers have to get a chauffeur license. They've got to come up with money for medallion. It's just not fair.
Well, then the aldermen should stop forcing them to do that. That's really the issue. It should be open competition, and then the taxi drivers shouldn't be forced to go through these mindless regulations that they have to go for. Certainly there should be safety concerns. Certainly there should be insurance concerns. But what the aldermans want is they want the dollars from the medallions so that they can fund whatever it is that they're funding incorrectly and inefficiently, by the way. Open up competition, lessen the regulation. It'll help the cab drivers, it'll help Uber, and ultimately it'll help all of us.
And finally, there is no joy in Wrigleyville. The Cubs swept in 4 straight games. And raspberries, or should we be proud of them?
Hey, I think we should be proud. I don't think anybody was expecting this to happen, and everybody was happy. And, to use a 100-year-old slogan, wait till next year, right?
But we're already hearing that a lot already.
Definitely proud. I mean, they really gave it their all. It's a great team. I'm actually excited about what they'll do next year.
The future is bright, but I have to tell you, I had a hard time getting out of bed this morning. It's as a lifelong Cub fan. My 10-year-old son, my daughters are Cub fans. My wife's a Cub fan. It's a little rough to have to take this, but it was a wonderful, exciting year and positive things on the horizon.
You sound all very positive. Some people are a little bitter about this, saying the curse is still in effect here for the Cubs.
Well, it sure looks that way. If Back to the Future can't break it, I don't know what will.
I'm optimistic. I'll root for them because this is a breakthrough year, and I think that they have a bright future.
There is no curse. We have to get beyond that. This team proved that. We just have had a run of bad luck. It's just happened to last longer than anyone would have ever imagined. But I'm hopeful that this group of folks at some point with this ownership and this general manager is going to bring us the World Series that we've long wanted and, frankly, I think deserve.
And meanwhile, the pain goes on for at least a few days until we can really start thinking about next year. And thanks to our guests, Pat Hughes, Amara Enya, and Stuart Cruz. The rides are slow, but the biking movement known as SlowRoll Chicago is moving fast across the city, peddling the benefits of building a stronger community, neighborhood by neighborhood. For Obai Reed, biking is more than just a matter of recreation.
Biking is freedom to me.
10 years ago, a bike ride saved his life. Reed suffered from depression and was even considering suicide when he decided to take a ride along Chicago's lakefront.
I'm riding, and every turn of the pedals, I'm feeling better and better. I smile at somebody and they smile back, you know, that moved me. And at that moment, I became a cyclist.
Riding helped Reed grow stronger, and soon he was spreading the message of biking for health and wellness to communities of color. But not everyone was willing to listen.
What we found is that the perception of biking in communities of color and low to moderate income communities is largely cycling is an activity that white people do, that little children do, or that spandex wearing fitness fanatics do on the lakefront. Our work is to break down those barriers and those perceptions of cycling and make this an activity that everybody feels connected to.
It's work that he's doing through SlowRoll Chicago, part of a global biking network that seeks to reintroduce bike riding to African American and Latino neighborhoods. The movement sees biking as a way to improve health, reduce violence, and create jobs. The rides, which started in Detroit, attracted 1,600 bikers during one gathering. SlowRoll Chicago was co-founded by Reed and his childhood friend, Jamal Julian. The pair hope that with their group bike rides through Chicago neighborhoods, they can change the perceptions of bike riding.
Thank you all for coming out. We ride as a group, so we want to keep the group tight and to the right. They call us SlowRoll for a reason. For us, it's about the journey, not the destination. So we deliberately roll slow, allow everybody to ride, no matter what skill level, no matter how fast you ride, no matter what, condition, what age you're at, anybody can ride with us.
Every Wednesday night from April to October, the group rolls through city neighborhoods including Bronzeville, Humboldt Park, Englewood, and West Pullman. Since the first ride in September 2014, more than 2,500 people have participated in SlowRoll Chicago. It's been such a success that now Reed and Julian are expanding on their concept of biking with a purpose.
We're implementing a program called Bike Shift, using bikes as vehicles for social change, using bikes to teach young people about community organizing, advocacy, leadership development, all of those skills that we want our young people to have to mature and to grow and develop. SlowRoll Chicago. And I'm so passionate about it because I want other people of color and low to moderate income people to also experience all of the inherent benefits of cycling.
And before we close, we would like to congratulate the founder of SlowRoll Chicago, Obai Reed. The White House presented him the Champions of Change Award. The award honors ordinary people who are doing extraordinary things in their communities. To hear more of Reed's personal story, go to our website at wycc.org and look for In the Loop. And join us next week when we take a look at the devastating impact of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder on unborn babies. Until then, I'm Chris Bury.